Welcome to Peptide Proof, your source for rigorous, independent, evidence-based peptide intelligence. Is BPC-157 the ultimate healing miracle or a gray market gamble? Let's get right into it. Section 1. The Gray Market Paradox. So the goal of today's explainer is pretty straightforward. We're going to dissect the massive, glaring gap between what BPC-170 is sold for online and what the clinical data actually proves. We're also going to look at that July 2026 FDA compounding vote, the one that totally changed the conversation around this molecule, and separate the internet hype from the hard evidence. Because right now, this is the reality of the landscape. According to a June 2026 survey by Hone Health, a whopping 50% of peptide users are completely in the dark about the FDA approval status of what they're actually taking. And crucially, millions of people are injecting this stuff without a doctor's prescription, without a pharmacy, and with absolutely zero FDA approval. You know, it just shows up in a padded envelope marked research use only, and people are literally just injecting it at home. It's wild. Section 2. The Massive Evidence Gap. Okay, let's take a look at the molecular profile. BPC-157 is a pentadecaptide. Now, that's really just a fancy way of saying it's a 15 amino acid sequence. But what's genuinely fascinating here is its origin. Researchers at the University of Zagreb in Croatia first isolated it back in the 1990s, and it actually comes from human gastric juice. Yeah, it's a fragment of a naturally occurring stomach protein, and because of where it comes from, its defining trait is this extreme molecular stability. It's highly prized because it can easily survive the harsh, acidic environment of the stomach, something most other peptides just can't do. But here's the kicker. Today, almost nobody uses it that way. Instead, it's marketed and sold as a lyophilized or freeze-dried powder. And that brings us to the clinical foundation. Notice the striking disparity in the data we're looking at here. This comes from a 2025 systematic review in the HSS Journal, that's the Journal of the Hospital for Special Surgery, where they screened 544 articles. In rats and rabbits, the data is undeniably impressive. We're talking consistent healing across GI ulcers, skin wounds, tendons, ligaments, and bone, across 35 distinct preclinical studies. But then, look at the human evidence. The entirety of the clinical human evidence relies on one single study. That crazy ratio right there, that is the entire story of this peptide, a mountain of rodent evidence and a molehill of human evidence. We really need to be crystal clear about what that human data actually is. The total human evidence for BPC-157 relies on just one retrospective report from 2021, looking at a grand total of 12 patients with knee pain. There was no control group, absolutely no randomization, and no standardized dose. Now, sure, 7 of those 12 reported some pain relief. But in the rigorous scientific world, a 12-person case series is really just a signal. It might be an interesting starting point for future research, but it is completely useless as definitive clinical proof.
Beyond the headlines.
Into the research. Peptide Proof.
Section 3. Mechanisms and unknown dosing. So how does it actually work? Well, in preclinical models, BPC-157 seems to dramatically accelerate healing through 3 theoretical steps. First, it resolves the early wound cascade. It triggers immediate vessel constriction, forms a platelet plug, and stabilizes the fibrin mesh. Next, it activates cellular pathways by essentially turning up growth hormone receptor expression and actively dialing down inflammatory cytokines. And finally, it promotes angiogenesis. That's the rapid growth of new blood vessels, which is absolutely crucial for delivering oxygen and nutrients right to the damaged tissues. But here is the hard truth about applying all those mechanisms to humans. BPC-157 has a half-life of less than 30 minutes. It clears the liver and the kidneys so incredibly fast that the molecule practically vanishes from the body instantly. Because of this ridiculously rapid clearance, the dose you take is, well, a number someone simply made up. Since it acts and clears so quickly, nobody has ever actually run the human dose-response clinical trials required to figure out what a safe or optimal dose even is. Section 4. FDA and supply chain. Now, in July 2026, we saw a major regulatory shift. An FDA advisory committee narrowly recommended adding BPC-157 to the compounding list. But we really need to clarify 2 distinct realities here, mostly because the media coverage around this has been totally confusing. First off, this was strictly a manufacturing decision. If the FDA formally adopts this, specialized U.S. pharmacies could legally compound BPC-157 behind a doctor's prescription. That would regulate the supply chain for the very first time. However, and this is huge, this was absolutely not an efficacy ruling. It does not mean the FDA has approved the peptide as safe and effective. It explicitly does not fix that massive gap in human clinical data we just talked about. And why does a regulated supply chain even matter? Let's trace the typical gray market journey. Right now, millions of users are injecting products that completely bypass federal review. It starts in an unregulated overseas lab, gets freeze-dried into a powder, is sold online explicitly under the guise of research use only, and then a user reconstitutes and injects it at home. Based on findings from a July 2026 Washington Post investigation and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, this journey comes with absolutely zero guarantee of purity or dose. Users are facing documented risks here: missing listed ingredients, unregulated manufacturing contaminants, heavy metals, organ toxicity, and severe injection site irritation. Section 5. Long-term safety risks. There's also a critical, totally unanswered question lying in angiogenesis, like we covered earlier. BPC-157 promotes rapid blood vessel growth to heal tissue. However, angiogenesis is the exact mechanism that cancer cells hijack to fuel tumor growth. Now, let's be incredibly clear on this. This does not mean BPC-157 causes cancer. There is zero clinical proof of that. What it does mean is that the mechanism it activates is treated by cancer biology as an on switch. And because of the complete lack of long-term human safety data, nobody has studied the peptide long enough in humans to safely rule out this risk. It's a serious mechanistic question that simply remains unanswered. Section 6. The bottom line. To wrap things up, let's look at the 3 key realities. First, the promise. There really is striking animal data showing consistently accelerated healing with low toxicity in those preclinical models. Second, the reality. 0 controlled human trials exist. The clinical evidence relies entirely on a single 12-person case series. Third, the future. The recent FDA compounding recommendations might eventually clean up the manufacturing supply chain, giving users a verified product, but it leaves that massive clinical evidence gap completely untouched. Oh, and one crucial final fact to keep in mind: the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, entirely bans the use of BPC-157 in professional sports. That's all for this episode. Comment peptide and I'll send you the full peptide skincare report. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.